Yes, Linda didn't have the time to check the Q&A questions coming in, but actually here I can see that two persons actually took over quite dominantly. Yes, and I do not want to recognize that there are also other sides, studies of facts that they like, that there is objection, that there is contradiction, and that there is something like an ethical question that are posed concerning nuclear energy. And I think this is something that hurt especially because it has to do with emotions, with feelings. And you can also bring forward the argument of humanity. There is one question, Philipp Kronbichler says, Arnie,
old new plans of NASA to create a new nuclear propulsion system. I don't know what it is. Propulsion system. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you. There is discussion about putting a nuclear reactor in space and using that to propel spacecraft to other planets or other solar systems or whatever. The problem is not once it's in space, the problem is as it gets to space. And we actually have an example of a Russian nuclear reactor that fell to Earth in northern Canada. Unfortunately, what goes up must come down, and a lot of these schemes have the downside that the Earth has gravity, and it is entirely possible that they could crash back to Earth before they leave Earth's gravity. So my concern, I just can't understand why we don't use solar collectors on a spaceship to power it as it moves away from the Earth instead of a heavy nuclear reactor. It seems to me that launching all that weight into orbit seems counterproductive. There was another discussion about advanced reactors, and those are PowerPoint reactors, to use Michael Schneider's word. They don't exist. They haven't been tested, and so all of these concepts are really marketing ploys, and there's no basis to put any faith in them. Thank you.
Ich darf an dieser Stelle jetzt auch die Zuhörerinnen.
At this point, I would also like to invite our audience to maybe use the raising hand function in order to take the floor, and we are then going to see whether we can get some questions from our audience and whether we can let them take part actively in the discussion. So I think I remember, Manfred, didn't you want to also come in and take the floor? I didn't find your question anymore, but I think you wanted to answer one of the questions that have been asked previously, right? So I think that maybe the sound engineer should connect you so that you can take the floor. Maybe you still remember what the question had been about. I think you have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Yes, I think we can hear you now, Manfred, if you're ready. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Well, my computer is just crashed a little bit. I can only see very small thumbnails. I don't really know what you were referring to, Gabi. Well, I think you wrote in the chat that Manfred would answer that question, and I don't know if you remember what it was. Well, I just wrote once that this is a killer argument. There's not only the danger, but billions and billions of euro have been invested into research, and it only amounts to 2% of the global energy production. So this is a killer argument. There's no way getting around this argument. And the second thing I was going to say is, and I would like to tell this Linda personally, I was very pleased that she also addressed the ethical dimension of this topic in her excellent, almost literary version of a presentation. So thank you very much for that. Now I'll try to get my system to work again. Okay, well, we have also received confirmation of this from Peter Kloins. I don't really know what language I should use here, but what he wrote is,
thank you. I will do my best to ensure as many people as possible see what you had to say. Wir sind auch schon ganz begeistert von der
we're also very pleased about the level of complexity of these presentations, because all speakers have their own style, their own contribution. We're looking forward to publishing that, and I hope that all speakers are going to agree to their presentations being shared. I believe that in the follow-up, yes, I see thumbs pointing up, so that's excellent. Thank you for your censor. I think we can use this in the follow-up, because now that the nuclear lobby is trying to convince young people that nuclear power may, after all, be the better solution to protect the climate and a possibility to halt global warming and climate change. So I believe it is difficult to maybe inform a generation of young people who maybe didn't really experience Chernobyl firsthand and who were still small kids when Fukushima happened. So they don't really know how reality can look when something bad happens. Here in Austria, a year ago, we launched a survey because we had thought that maybe there are some young people out there who do no longer believe that nuclear power is dangerous and doesn't make sense. And really, in this nuclear-free country of Austria, where there's a consensus against nuclear power, that especially the generation of 16 to 29-year-old men, well, 1/3 of them are in favor of nuclear power. And that is a worrying trend that we need to counteract. Because in 1978, and Linda, you said that Austria is free from nuclear power, but we do have a nuclear power plant. You know, we have the safest one in the world because the chain reaction was never started. Our power plant, Zwentendorf, there was a tough struggle for nuclear-free, at least Austria. And, well, we won, and the strong anti-nuke movement is still getting some tailwind from that, because we had a sensational majority of 50.47% who were speaking out against nuclear power. So a very tight race indeed during the referendum back then. Okay, so may I come in? I have a general question. Let me put it in English first, and then repeat it in German.
Question to Arnie. Our unrelenting troll, Mr. Mraz, mentioned that uranium would last 40 to 60,000 years. What do you say to this
uranium last
numbers?
Uranium's half-life is extraordinarily long.
Yeah,
around the life of the world. Plutonium's half-life, this is the element that doesn't exist in nature, is about 24,000 years. So in about 250 to 500,000 years, plutonium will have decayed away. But uranium will be with us for for eons and eons. It's part of the fundamental building block of the Earth.
I guess he meant 40 to 60,000 years for mining uranium.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. The uranium that's in the ground is trapped in a rock-like lattice that has been there for millions and millions of years. What man has done is strip that uranium from the rock that it's trapped in, and has created what we call tailings, which is the residual waste after some of the uranium has been stripped out. And as Linda so eloquently talked about in her speech, the tailings are in an impounded area, and that impoundment failed at Church Rock and flooded thousands and thousands of acres with radioactive residue, including some uranium, but other elements as well.
Serpent River.
So that will, and it's up at Serpent River, up in Canada. It's in Kazakhstan. It's everywhere that uranium is mined. Now they're drilling into the ground, called in situ mining. They inject acid into the earth and pump the liquid up, and then evaporate the liquid to get the uranium. And that has exactly the same types of problems as well, except you don't see the large hole for the uranium mine. But in fact, we're injecting acid into the earth, which to me doesn't sound like a very good reason. Those mill tailings will last as long as the uranium did. It's still going to be giving off the gases, but it has been lost in the rock that has encapsulated it for millions of years. So in a quest to have electricity so we can watch late night TV, we poison the earth for eons.
Is this the same question when we ask how long does oil last? Because you're always going to find a new source.
I don't understand.
I think what he's asking actually is how that he's trying to say that there's plenty of uranium left to mine, so there's no need to abandon nuclear power because it's sort of an infinite resource. But that's not necessarily true in terms of the quality of the uranium. And so when you use up the high-grade uranium and you go to the low-grade uranium, you're looking at a much more carbon-intensive operation. And therefore, it's even worse for climate than it already was. That's not getting into the argument about the economics and the fact that it squeezes out the opportunity, the funding that would go into extracting that uranium could be better spent in developing renewables. But I think that's what he was asking. But I don't think we should spend any more time on this particular individual because he's actually posting ad hominem threats right now into our chat. So I think that we need to move on to some of the legitimate members of the audience who have serious questions and not people who want to throw curse words at us and ad hominem threats. So let's go back to something more substantive. And actually, I wouldn't, if you're okay, Gabby, I would like to just go back to what you mentioned about the youth movement and the climate change, because I think that what they're really concerned about, having 20-year-old daughters of my own, what they're concerned about is that we're out of time and that our governments are just not doing what they should be doing fast enough. And it's an emergency. If you listen to Greta Thunberg, that's what she's saying, right? That you've got to do it now. And therefore, the argument to apply for them, I think, is not so much about whether, Chernobyl, which is a piece of history to them, even though it's a genuine risk. The argument is that if you decide to back nuclear, you are inevitably ensuring that we don't do enough now. You're just prolonging the use of an antiquated, expensive, slow technology that isn't in compliance with the kinds of grids that we're going to be using, and it's just going to interfere, obstruct, and delay action on climate change. So if you are a young person who's serious that we are in a climate emergency, the last thing you should be doing is backing nuclear power. And that, I think, is the most potent argument for that particular group of people, to help them understand that that's the wrong dead end to go down.
Can I add to that? We put a 2-minute animation up on the Fairwind site called Smokescreen, CO2 Smokescreen, and it's in German, it's in French, it's in Japanese, and it's in English, and it addresses the same points that Linda was talking about. We've got climate change is a now problem. We need now solutions, and a 10 or 20 year time plan to build a nuclear plant at 2 or 3 or 4 times the cost of replacing it with a renewable source actually crowds out the best solutions, which are renewable solutions. So by investing in new nuclear, we're crowding out a now solution that's already proven to be cheaper, not some kind of PowerPoint analysis that shows that maybe 20 years from now a nuclear future may be cheaper. We have a now problem, we need a now solution, and the cheapest alternatives are renewables.
Maybe if I can, I would like to add to this, because this was the biggest surprise to me after not having worked on energy systems for 5 years. And then I did the review, how much had changed, how much had improved in the economics of the renewables. And yes, the climate crisis is a very serious one, and there's a lot of work to do. But the renewables, I agree, have a great potential, and the technological advance was fantastic in the last few years. So while I'm always a bit techno-skeptic, I think in this regard, there is a lot of potential for hope. For example, the city of Vienna had a feasibility study done what share of electricity could be generated from covering roofs of Viennese houses that are suitable for PV with PV plants or PV panels. And the answer is not on all days, because November is a tough one in Vienna, but on many days of the year, the electricity that Viennese households need could be easily covered by using the roofs that are not used in any other form at the moment, meaning they're not terraces, they are not green roofs, so they're just lying there idle without any fuel cost. And if we have technologies like these at a very reasonable price at the moment now, they were much more expensive 20 years ago, but now they're really moderately priced. I think this is the way to go.
Ich möchte hier eine Frage von Julia Bonert.
I would like to share a question by Julia Bonert. I know her. She's a young activist, and she is a very pragmatic girl. And she's saying, well, thank you very much for the excellent presentations. And then her question follows: what are the strategies for effective lobbying against the lies of the nuclear industry do the speakers recommend for citizens, for NGOs?
Her mit den guten Ideen, wir setzen
Well, any good ideas? Go ahead, we are going to implement everything. Any good ideas are welcome. As somebody coming from the university, this is not my principal expertise, but in several events where decision makers were also present, what I experienced was what the voice of young people can do. Fridays for Future, for example, they have good scientific arguments. They contribute their ideas and their position, and did so in a very effective way. So young people have a higher degree of legitimacy because the well-being for their future lives are being claimed by them. This is why they have a higher degree of legitimacy. And if they present their claims in a scientifically founded way, then, well, that's one strategy we can pursue. Professor Stagl, do you have any contacts with Fridays for Future? Have you been requested by them as a speaker? I think they're quite skillful, right? And we have some contacts with Fridays for Future Austria. They are very skillful, right? They get experts to speak for them. They organize workshops. So do you have any contacts with them? Yes. Sometimes when they publish a statement, they quickly send it to a group of scientists for future to make sure that what they're saying is solid and robust. And that's just best practice, yeah. And of course, people who are producing knowledge will gladly help to disseminate this knowledge. Eva wants to take the floor. Go ahead. Well, I would like to report about this nuclear advertising video that caused such an outcry here. It was Fridays for Future who turned to me directly and said, well, this sounds quite good, doesn't it? And I explained a couple of things to them, and then they knew what this was about, and they helped send complaints to public TV. So once they understand how they're being lied to, they can become very active, and they can also argue properly, defend their ideas. And the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany passed a judgment today about CO2 reduction, and the German government and its climate package is not in line with the Paris goals, because the time after 2031 is not considered. So the older generation are engaging in laissez-faire, and to put it on the shoulders of the younger generation to have to reduce CO2 after this time. And of course, you can add to this, on top of everything else, by saying, well, we're going to start building nuclear power plants in a very CO2 intensive way with a lot of steel and concrete, and then we put it at the doorstep of our young people to solve. So I think we can create an awareness among the younger generation to help them to understand that they're being cheated if they're being told fairy tales about these new type of reactors that are to be built up at some point in future when it's long too late, and they're supposed to save our climate, but it's already too late by then. Well, that has also been our experience. When you get in touch with them and when you document and explain based on clear facts, you can really convince a lot of people. And well, nuclear power is too dirty, too expensive, and comes too late. We don't have the time, we don't have the money. So people do understand this quite well. It is well communicated. Of course, it is laborious. You need to do this actively. Nobody will come and ask you whether we have anything to say about this. But I think that this is an initial success for Europe. And I think he's somewhere here among the spectators. Günther Herrmeier, our colleague from Germany, has said that the Climate for Justice movement have made a clear statement against nuclear power. I think it was in March. They had a press conference and they were quite unmistakable. They said climate justice against nuclear, to put it in a nutshell. So it does work. Do we have any questions? Linda, go ahead, Linda. You're next.
Just going to add to that, I think that here in the US, for example, and this is about what strategies can young people deploy to be effective. And here in the US, we have something called the Sunrise Movement, which has been on the forefront of pushing the Green New Deal. And I think one of the things that I like about them, and in a way, they're almost perhaps taking a leaf out of the German activism book, is that they don't assume that because a politician from a particular party is going to be necessarily on their side, even if they're from more of the left side, the more progressive side. So they are always vigilant, even with their allies, to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And For example, they went into and occupied the offices of the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is the most powerful Democrat in Congress, and theoretically one of the good guys, but they were there to make sure that she led the movement rather than hindered it. And they do that on a consistent basis. So I think that's very important for young people to do, to not trust politicians just because they're maybe, even from the Greens, you've just got to always put the pressure on. And the other thing you can do is your own media, especially now. I mean, we are up against it, obviously, from the finance point of view. We don't have the power to make some slick video and get it seen on CNN or wherever, but we have opportunities on so many platforms, on social media sites, on TikTok, everywhere, to get the message out. And it's really important to get the message to young people where they are. So Facebook probably isn't going to be the answer. You have to go where the young people are talking to each other and make the media that needs to be seen. And young people can do that themselves. And I think we're sometimes lax about writing letters to the editor in the papers, or trying to get articles submitted, or pushing our way into the conversation. And it's not enough to be right. We've got to go out there and continually repackage the message in a way that will appeal to the audience we're trying to move. And so that's another area that gets neglected, which could be very useful.
Arnie?
Hey, I just wanted to add to what Linda said, that we had 4 young interns working at Fairwinds who put together the 2-minute animation I was talking about earlier, and they told us that the average, if you got an animation that's more than 2 minutes, people won't watch, which is how we structured it. And so I absolutely agree that it's an old guy like me talking to somebody who's 15 or 20 is not going to have the impact that a young person talking to a young person is going to achieve. And it's not going to be on Facebook. It's going to be on dozens of other channels that are popping up as well. I think that in America we have 2 nuclear reactors that are way over budget and are still being constructed, but that's it. And if you look in Japan, there's 1 or 2 that claim to be being built, but they're not. And in Western Europe, the same holds true. Even the French are talking about cutting back to 50% instead of 75% nuclear. And of course, the Germans are leading the world in an export technology, which is exciting. But the one area where the playing field is not level is those semi-authoritarian countries in the center of Europe. The Chinese and the Russians and the Americans, Westinghouse, are all fighting to get nuclear power plants put in there instead of what the rest of the world is acknowledging as a cheaper alternative. This is the title of an editorial in the New York Times today. This is New York Times. So I think what we're talking about now has become mainstream. The wind and solar boom is here. And one of the lines is, still amid all the general gloom of climate change, the clean energy boom offers a rare glimpse, not just of hope, but of something more, excitement. So I think while there's places in the world where the nuclear contractors are actively engaged still, primarily Eastern Europe, we have a better message. The Buckminster Fuller quote about, to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. We need to talk about, there's a better model out there. I said at a speech I gave at Northwestern that the nuclear industry would have us believe that they're smart enough to store nuclear waste for 250,000 years, but the rest of us are so dumb, we can't figure out a way to store solar electricity overnight. We're on the cusp of a tidal wave, and for those parts of the world where I would call it almost authoritarian socialism, expensive nuclear power is still in play. I think we have a better story to tell, and I think that's really the message that I would leave you with.
Da schließt eine Frage von Philipp Kronbichler eigentlich ganz gut an. Und die geht.
There's a question asked by Philipp Kronbichler, which is directed at Eva Stegen. How does the private energy supply network work in Schönau, your community? So what are the experiences of providing municipalities with renewables? Well, let me explain for other people. Chernobyl was the birth hour of a lot of anti-nuclear initiatives in the 1980s, globally, and also in Germany. And one of these many initiatives had been in Schönau, in the Black Forest. And it's a small community where they just try to see how they can manage to have no irradiated milk for children and get the radioactivity out of the sandboxes. And then they saw that they needed to tackle the evil by the roots. We need to get nuclear power out of our electricity systems. And the legal situation was different back then. But this crazy idea that we need to defend ourselves against nuclear power then turned into building our own energy supply. So we started in the small municipality of Schönau, and this was organized by a parents' initiative, and this turned into a local utility, electricity company. And at some point, everybody was allowed to choose their own utility, and they didn't have to choose these fossil-based or nuclear-based utilities, because the coal-fired and the nuclear power plants, they always work in league. So we don't need to subsidize them by buying power from them. So we can choose our own supplier. And when that was liberalized, we started providing people all over Germany. We had 2,000 households originally, now we have 220,000 energy customers all over Germany. And we are doing it just like every other utility does it. In Germany, we have about 1,000 utilities. And of course, people can choose whom they want to use as suppliers. But often people want to have green energy. And it's not witchcraft. So it's not only that we provide one municipality with energy, but we have a whole bouquet of different measures that we are trying to use to contribute to make sure that in Germany, the power mix is becoming cleaner. And of course, the power customers help us to give an impetus in the market in order to have more and more renewables that are connected to the grid. Does this answer your question more or less? Because you can't really do it with one sentence, because it's a bit complicated. We're a bit broad-based.
So we will see if Thomas Kronbichler is satisfied with this answer. We have a little time reserved for questions. I got a question. I received a question. So there were also many proponents of nuclear energy here. Carsten Rau, for example, he provided us with a hint to the arguments going in the direction of uranium supplies for 60,000 years. He says,
because many of your listeners are faced with this debate with nuclear lobbyists. So give us good arguments.
Okay, did you just lose it?
60.000 Jahre würden
60,000 years. It would take 60. So uranium supplies would last for 60,000 years. This was the argument that was brought forward.
I think what Linda said earlier was correct, in that You know, when the bomb program was created, the ore from the Belgian Congo was 2% uranium. It's now down to less than 0.1% uranium, and is heading down toward 0.01%, the concentration of the uranium in the ore, in the ore. So while there's a lot of uranium, mining it and then extracting the uranium from the rock becomes more expensive and more polluting as you go down to the lower and lower intensities of uranium. You know, there may be, I have no idea how much uranium is. Let's just say it's 60,000 years. We have an infinite capacity for the solar, and we have an infinite capacity for wind. So I still think on that grounds that renewables trump uranium.
I mean, it's a complete red herring. It doesn't matter how much uranium there is in the ground. I mean, would you make the same argument about oil? Well, we still got oil, so we should use it, you know? I mean, that just doesn't even sort of begin to address what happens next, you know? I mean, even if you take out the environmental justice component of it, the fact that nuclear power plants take so long to build and so long to come online, and, you know, they just aren't going to be here in time. So whether their uranium is there or not, I think it's a typical red herring. You know, it's a diversion away. It's a bit like the argument about how much space renewables take up, how much land renewables take up versus how the footprint of nuclear power plant. Completely irrelevant, because you can do so many things beneath wind turbines, you know, so you can put solar panels on the roofs of parking structures. So it's much more malleable, it's much more flexible renewables, it's much faster, it's much cheaper, it's a lot safer. Nothing's safe, but it's a lot safer. So whether there's uranium left or not, it's just a sort of diversionary tactic, and one could say there's coal still in the ground, there's natural gas still, or is oil still, but we shouldn't be taking this out of the ground. We should be looking at renewables and energy efficiency, which we haven't talked about much, but is an essential component of how we get where we need to go, and can get us a very, very long way, you know, without having to do any kind of energy generation. So that would be my response to that.
Eine noch sehr konkrete Frage.
A very specific question in very practical terms, coming from the Waldviertel Energiestammtisch. They thank us for the impressive insights and presentations. If we assume that France, besides of Russia, is one of the drivers for nuclear power in the future, are there any hints or indications how the critical voices in France can be strengthened and supported? Especially in those two countries, I especially think about very clear, straightforward arguments like huge water consumption of nuclear power plants and water scarcity that increases with global warming, and also the role of vapor in the atmosphere as an additional driver for global warming. Is there anyone who could comment on this? So the question was originally how we deal with these facts. I think it's Renate. Water consumption, how we can weave it into an argument strengthening the anti-nuclear activists in France. I would like to attach another question. Is there any discussion in the United States on this topic, that the resource of water, so it's basically in stark contrast, in conflict with nuclear energy? Eva, yes, please. So if I take a look at France and a statement that nuclear energy is so safe and reliable, then I would like to state, well, in the summer, with the increasing climate catastrophe, we always have the situation that there is not enough cooling water. And French have seen it firsthand that in the scorching summers, nuclear power plants have to regulate it down. And it can't be the purpose of the enterprise. And during the winter, since 2009, they have the opposite problem, because in the winter in France, there is so much heating going on with electricity. There is a bilateral exchange between France and Germany, following the course of a trough curve. So in the summer, when the French close their factories, when they go on vacations, when electricity consumption goes down, they shift their nuclear electricity. And during the winter, they heat with the neighboring countries electricity coming from coal, because they have a lack of capacities, and basically because the market is conquered by nuclear energy, and renewables are not let in due to restrictions. And I think this could be a helpful argumentation that could be brought forward. Arnie, you wanted to take the floor?
There's two questions there. The first is the winter issue, and the French have actually created the problem because in the summer and fall there was plenty of nuclear power and not enough people to use it. So they encouraged people to install electric heat. So then on the coldest days, everybody turns on their electric heat, and they've got to import into their grid. So the encouragement of people when the peak, in order to level the peak, the French designed a rate structure to keep those nukes running even when they didn't have to be, by having people put electric heat in, and that becomes then a driver of a crisis in the cold middle of the winter. The second part of that is the summer, and of course, nuclear plants are the largest, have per kilowatt, nuclear plants consume what's called consumptive use of water. They consume the most water, even compared to coal or natural gas. Per kilowatt output, nuclear plants need more water than any other way of producing power in a thermal power plant. So so global warming is making that worse for two reasons. One is water temperatures are rising. At the same time, water flows are decreasing. I think the Rhine recently was at almost an all-time low. So that the sources of water to cool these nukes is literally drying up. So global warming, nukes don't help global warming, but we need to mitigate global warming if you want to keep nuclear power running, which is not an argument I want to support. So I think the French have it backward on the electric production in the winter, and everybody, every country that I'm aware of, faces the same problem in the summer with decreasing water flow and increasing water temperature that's forcing these nuclear plants with high consumptive use of water to actually reduce power at a time when the load is the highest.
Nochmal zurückkommen auf die.
Well, coming back to the statement as to the 60,000 years of potential for uranium supplies, David Reinberger, who thanked us most warmly for the event, wrote to us, it's not 60,000 years, but approximately 100,000 years. This is the exact figure, according to the scientific service of the German parliament, and it bases itself on the findings of the IAEA.
IAEA promotes its charters to promote nuclear.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. You won't get rid of this question somehow.
I think we answered the question earlier. Linda's answer was right on the mark. We have coal in the ground. Why not use it? The fact of the matter is that that uranium exists is true, but the cost of mining it as the concentrations per pound of ore drop makes it more and more and more expensive. We've got more wind and solar than we'll ever consume in a million years. So I don't understand how 60,000 versus 100,000 years of uranium makes any economic sense.
Ich habe jetzt noch eine Frage.
So I have another question. I've received another question. I think it goes to Arnie.
On the proposed discharge of contaminated water from Fukushima into the Pacific. Can one do something like that?
Okay.
Annehmen.
Maggie and I have two peer-reviewed papers, along with Dr. Kaltofen of Worcester Poly, on the amount of radiation in northern Japan. The Tokyo Electric Power has been collecting water that's
Tokyo Electric Power hat Energie.
Is collecting water that's
also es wurde
nuclear reactors, and that water
schon untersucht. Also dieses
that water then is put into tanks.
Wasser wird in Tanks geleitet. Es gibt hier zwei falsche Bezeichnungen, zwei falsche Argumente. Und zwar, dass es irgendwann einmal zu wenig Land geben wird. Wenn man sich Satellitenfotos vom Bereich rund um Fukushima anschaut, dann sieht man, dass es genug Land gibt, um noch mehr Tanks zu bauen. Es soll eine gewisse imaginäre Linie einfach nicht überschritten werden. Also wenn Sie hier wirklich eine Speicherung vornehmen würden, die Inhalte des Wassers sind nicht gerade harmlos und es wird aber als harmlos dargestellt von den offiziellen Stellen. Es wird gefiltert, aber durch die Filterung geht nicht das ganze Cäsium oder das ganze Strontium raus oder die ganzen anderen gefährlichen Elemente. Sie konzentrieren sich aufs Tritium und behaupten, dass es harmlos ist. Es ist aber auch nicht harmlos. Also aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen wollen sie einfach den Pazifik als den Platz verwenden, wo alles hin abgeleitet wird. Es wurde gesagt, es ist alles so harmlos, man könnte es genauso gut in die Bucht vor Tokio leiten. Es ist nicht notwendig, es in den Pazifik zu leiten. Es gibt die Alternative, noch mehr Tanks zu bauen. Sie wollen einfach eine imaginäre Linie nicht überschreiten und sie könnten diese Abfälle jahrzehntelang speichern. This is also a question I received by Alex Rosen, who is no longer with us, and he said, that is a lie. If you say it's the only alternative, the only possibility that you have, it's just the cheapest possibility that you have. And the others, all the other solutions would be costly. And this is just the cheapest alternative to just throw everything into the sea. And we had this problem decades ago. Let's see if there are any other questions coming in or if there is anyone wanting to comment.
But they don't see it.
Manfred, kannst du noch etwas entdecken? Du hast ja auch.
Manfred, is there any question? Can you see any question? And Eva, I think, has a question. So a thought went through my head. So we thought about what advice could we give to the Fridays for Future, or maybe we could learn from the Fridays for Future activists. So I heard in multiple instances that Fridays for Future in Germany has complained that some representatives of the press, of the media, say that there are some activists in the Friday for Future movement saying that nuclear energy is dissolution. It's a minority. The Fridays for Future activists in Germany clarified it on their website that they are against nuclear energy, and time and again they are quite angry if the press tells otherwise, and everyone attacked Greta Thunberg when she cited the IPCC report and said that I'm against nuclear energy, but they didn't want to hear it. They wanted to hear otherwise, and this also happened with the Fridays for Future activists. Their arguments have been turned around. Maybe it would be good to let them talk from their experience, how they perceive it, how they experience it, so that they are always abused, and that media are trying to portray them as pro-nuclear movement. And I think it would be really worthwhile to listen to them very closely, to what they have to say. So I have another comment from Verena Kiesenhofer. It's not a question, but she makes an important point I would like to share with you in connection with discussion about the JRC report. I want to point to the study of INRAG that has presented this week on the risk of extending the operation period. It's against the JRC report on the taxonomy regulation. And it's against the argument that nuclear energy is harmless. The EU does not have any strict safety regulations. The obsolete nuclear power plants of the European Union are not at a very high safety standard. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Wolfgang Romp, and he confirmed that this very study is also available publicly, and that it also exactly corresponds to what you just told us. A very simple question.
Ich würde sogar fragen, wie können wir die Inbetriebnahme der Schrottreaktoren in Mochovce und Krško verhindern?
Can we prevent the commissioning of the scrap reactors in Mochovce? There has been, well, quite jokingly, a statement on this with 15,000 tons of tonnage, right?
Hier ist eine Frage, die ist direkt
Here is a question directed to Linda. She's going to answer this question herself, I think, either orally or in writing. Linda, I can see that you're still with us.
Yes, sorry. Can you repeat the question? I was just writing an answer to it.
It was the question about, oops, can't find it again because it's, it's now in the,
it's in the answer.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's here. Genau. It's, bitte, Linda.
Concern about the drinking water in Irwin, and I'm not as familiar with the specifics of that particular situation right now, but I know that the activist group there have been very alarmed by the exposures in the drinking water. So yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Und ich habe vorhin noch eine Frage.
Okay, and I received another question. I found another question that we could take up.
Dürfte auch schon beantwortet sein.
I think this question has been answered already. So there is still a lot coming in.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes. So if there are no questions that remain, of course, we could close a little bit earlier. Basically, we have reserved time up to 7 p.m. But I would like to add that on behalf of the 3 organizing institutions, I would like to thank you for your vivid participation, for the great number of viewers from all corners of the world. I would like to thank the speakers, especially for their wonderful, insightful contributions. You yourselves have access, and you know there have been so many laudatory comments, and in the follow-up, your presentations will make an impact. They will be available. We are going to use them for the benefit of the debate revolving around climate change, and will especially direct it to young people. I think there is a lot of suitable material. Maybe Manfred, you can also use it during your presentations at schools. Now, I would like to thank someone else, and this is our sound engineers who, so actually we started well in the morning, and I think everything worked out quite well. There were no severe hiccups, but although I can see them laughing now as if they would know more than me, and I would also like to thank most cordially our simultaneous interpreters. It's no mean feat actually, and even if the translation has worked out just as well as the last time, I think we should give them a round of applause. Do you agree with me closing off the event a little bit earlier? You can relax in the comfort of your own home, prepare yourself a little coffee, and of course, we are going to provide you with the presentations, the audio recordings. I don't know when exactly, but I think, well, considering post-production, I think we should be ready in about 1 week. Well, the presentations, of course, will be available much faster on the website. They will be published on the website. And we will keep you posted. We will keep you posted in the US about everything that is going on in terms of nuclear energy. I hope that we can stay in touch. It was so nice to see you in these little squares, at least on the screen. But for the next time, I would really wish for a personal encounter, and I would like to spoil you with some Linzer cake. Thank you very much for listening, for chiming in, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.